taking into account the circumstances and the compulsions of a coalition polity, I have done as best as I could do under the circumstances.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a day of collective grief, a day of collective mourning. Dr. Manmohan Singh, India's 13th Prime Minister and a celebrated economist, passed away last night at the age of 92. In fact, his life was one of dedication to public service, integrity and an unwavering commitment to India's progress. The former Prime Minister of India, the man behind liberalizing our economy, Dr. Singh, passed away last night after he fell unconscious. In fact, the gentle giant that he was respected not just in his party but across party lines. He now leaves behind an unmatched legacy. He was the architect of India's economic liberalization in the P.V. Narasimha Rao government in the early 1990s, a man who always liked calling himself a student. Despite being a noted economist, has left an indelible mark on the nation's governance and economy. He served as India's Prime Minister for 2 consecutive terms, that is from 2004 and 2014. But that's not how he started. He was born in Gah in 1932, which is now in Pakistan, and rose from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most influential figures in modern-day India. And to speak to us about his legacy and the man that Dr. Singh was, I'm now joined by Mr. P. Chidambaram, India's former Finance Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Chidambaram, for joining us here on ET Now. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time out. We've been speaking of Dr. Singh's invaluable contribution to the Indian economy, that is ushering in liberalization of the 1990s, bringing in foreign brands, satellite TV. But sir, you've worked closely with him. You've known him well. What, in your view, is his biggest contribution, the biggest contribution that he made to modern India? Some of those contributions which are still having an impact on present-day economic growth?
He proved and convinced people by his actions that India required an open economy. Just as we boast that the Constitution of India keeps our politics open and competitive politics, he believed that India needs an open and competitive economy. There were hundreds of critics within the government, hundreds of opponents who tried to scuttle his policies, yet he persisted and prevailed. Of course, he was supported fully by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao in the period 1991 to 96. But I think Dr. Manmohan Singh's greatest contribution was in establishing that the laws of economics work in India, will work in India, and that an open and competitive economy is much better than a regulated and controlled economy.
Absolutely, sir. But one of his greatest contribution also comes in from how he navigated the global financial crisis in 2008 and before which India had registered strong growth. What do you really think was the key to navigating that period, and what policies at that point in time really worked for India?
No, this is not a time for anecdotes. A proper biographer will write about them after doing research. When the US financial crisis hit India, Dr. Manmohan Singh was abroad. I had a planned visit to my alma mater, Harvard University, and I was scheduled to leave on September 15. But he called me from the US and said, we have to be on guard, we have to be firm and strong. Will you please cancel your visit to the US? I said, of course I will. And we assembled our team in the Finance Ministry. The PMO was fully informed, and I had met with the Prime Minister several times, that the steps we were taking to ensure that no bank collapsed in India, and eventually no bank collapsed in India, small or big, private or public. We ensured that there was no run on our banks. We ensured that all our international obligations were met. There were, of course, some consequences, but we were able to manage those consequences thanks to his guidance. He was like an invisible presence in the deliberations of the officials and minister in the finance ministry, and we would report to him from time to time, sometimes daily, and he ensured that we were on the right course. The right course was holding firm, taking the necessary measures between the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India, and not attempting anything rash or foolish.
Absolutely, sir. But let's also speak about, one of his biggest contributions to India, and that is the creation of middle class. At the point when it got created, it was primarily due to Dr. Singh's liberalization, which was ushered in by his various other policies, that actually the middle class in India got created.
There was no middle class before he unveiled the economic reforms. What we called middle class was actually the poor class. The others were destitute. We had a middle class which lived in small dwellings, no more than 200 or 250 square feet. They had small salaries. They had little money to spend, and they had no choice of goods or services. You call that a middle class? We thought it was a middle class because anyone below the middle class was so poor that this was the middle class. The middle class is defined as a class which has an income commensurate to what it contributes to the economy and the society. And it has a choice of goods and services, and it has time and money for other than bread and butter issues like education, travel, recreation, buying books, etc. That middle class, which is today ensconced in India, was the creation of Dr. Manmohan Singh's policies and actions. The entire middle class is the creation of Dr. Manmohan Singh. And which constituency defines the middle class and the upper middle class better than New Delhi? Unfortunately, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was a candidate in New Delhi, that middle class defeated him. It hurt him. I know it hurt him, but he didn't show his hurt. He continued to place trust in the expansion of the middle class because the middle class in any country is the engine of growth.
Absolutely, sir. And that really is a tragic part because the very middle class that he helped in creating didn't really support him, like you said, in that particular election. And so when we speak about middle class, we also have to attribute to him that he did lift out approximately 300 million out of poverty. But let's focus a little bit on the India-US nuclear deal talks per se, because that was one policy move wherein he faced a lot of pressure, particularly from left parties. Many said that he was also pro-US, but he didn't budge at that point in time. But help me understand, was there ever a point wherein he contemplated giving in to the pressure, and how did he really maneuver through that period?
He didn't maneuver, he stood firm. I know this from close quarters. He just stood firm and said, this is my line, and as long as I am head of the government, this line will prevail. There were heartburns, there were disappointments, but he internalized them and put up a brave and firm face and said, as long as I'm Prime Minister, this policy will prevail. And the opponents, except of course the left, fell in line, the doubters fell in line, and we were able to sign the Indo-US nuclear deal. I think that instance, that period showed that Dr. Manmohan Singh's spine was strong.
Absolutely, sir. And he did exhibit leadership qualities. He firmly stood for what he believed in and was good for the country. But, sir, he often faced a lot of criticism about being a silent prime minister. He famously also said during one of his press conferences that he does hope that while the media did not, the history would treat him kindly. How did he process all of that criticism? Because some of it not just came from outside the party, but from within his own party.
Contemporary critics within the party and outside, and the media were hostile to him. They were in fact unfair to him. They blamed the mythical telecom scam on him. They blamed the exaggerated coal scam on him, forgetting that he is the Prime Minister. He is the apex of a huge civil administrative structure. Does a Prime Minister, when a coal allocation file comes to him, read the applications and then decide which applicant was good and which applicant deserves to be allocated the coal mine? This is rubbish. In no country does it happen. It's only in India we believe that the Prime Minister selects the coal mine allottee. Everybody from the state government right up to the coal secretary, and then if there is a committee of ministers or a committee of secretaries, and the Prime Minister's office, including the PS to the Prime Minister, have examined the file. And if they have recommended coal allottee should get the coal mine, the Prime Minister will look at the final note, and if all seems well, he will sign. And that is the way Indian civil administration can be carried on and was carried on. But the media was hostile. His critics, of course, were hostile. But when did you sit back and ask the question, is it the Prime Minister's business to examine every coal mine allocation, in which event he can only do 2 files a day? I mean, this was laughable. And some courts even accepted that laughable proposition. The same thing with the telecom scandal. Now, the telecom scandal, of course, was a bogus scandal. Where is the author of that report? Who remembers him? Who remembers his name? Where is that 1,74,000 crore? It was a mythical figure. It was a bogus figure. And the only telecom case that was prosecuted ended in a complete acquittal. Therefore, I think people were unkind to him and therefore hurt Dr. Manmohan Singh. Said the maximum a decent man can say, that history will be kind to me.
Absolutely, sir. But he took all of that in his stride and did what he needed to do at that point in time. But one final question, sir, before we let you go. Now, besides his path-breaking legislations, including NREGA, Food Security Act, RTI, time is not enough to remember his body of work, and we've tried to do that in these past few minutes. But how do you remember his legacy and lessons in leadership that present-day leaders and future leaders can take?
See, this is not a time to make a recriminatory statement. But I think we know that they tried to wipe out 10 years of Indian history as if the world had stopped in 2004 and it restarted in 2014. As if the 10 years were dies non, as we call it in law, dies non, non-existent days. Now people remember what happened in those 10 years, and I'm grateful for all those who remembered, including Dr. Manmohan Singh's opponents and critics, who recalled all that happened in those 10 years. I have listed it in many interviews and in my tweet. So much happened in those 10 years. And in fact, I'm not taking away anything from the credit of the present government. Many of the present government's successful programs and schemes are building up on the ideas and seeds sowed by Dr. Manmohan Singh. I can give you any number of examples. RTI, RTA, right to food, Aadhaar, direct benefit transfer, the so-called Jan Dhan account, which is the zero balance account. Every seed was sowed in Dr. Manmohan Singh's period, and it has now flowered and become a big tree. I'm happy. They are sowing new seeds and I wish them well. But you cannot deny that the first man to plow the field and sow the seeds of new ideas was Dr. Manmohan Singh in 1991, and then he expanded upon it in 2004 when he became Prime Minister.
Absolutely, sir. And in conclusion, as the former US President Barack Obama stated, Dr. Singh was not just a man of uncommon decency and wisdom, but also a fitting emblem of the progress made by India. And sir, like you rightly said, his legacy is enshrined in the reforms of his era. Those reforms continue to live on even today. On that note, thanks very much, sir, once again for joining us here on ET Now. Thanks very much for taking the time out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was former Finance Minister of India, Mr. P. Chidambaram, speaking exclusively to ET Now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.